The perfect suburban mom was living a double life. Part 1. The Facade. The Hendersons lived on Maplewood Drive in the heart of Oak Brook, Illinois, a street where the lawns were greener than money and the smiles were wider than the Chicago River. Every morning at 6:15, Claire Henderson would emerge from her colonial-style home in pressed yoga pants and a Lululemon top, her blonde ponytail swinging like a metronome of perfection. She'd wave to the neighbors, deposit her 3 children, Emma, 12, Jack, 9, and little Sophie, 6, into her pristine white Volvo XC90 and drive them to the prestigious Brookfield Academy before returning home to bake gluten-free muffins for the PTA bake sale. Claire was the woman every other mother in Oak Brook wanted to be. She chaired the school fundraising committee, organized the neighborhood watch, and volunteered at the local food pantry every Tuesday. Her husband, David, was a senior partner at a downtown law firm, and their Instagram-worthy life was the envy of everyone who scrolled through their perfectly curated feed. But on the night of October 17th, the mask cracked. It started with a sound that didn't belong in Oak Brook, a sound that belonged in nightmares. Part 2. The Knock. The thunderstorm that rolled through the Chicago suburbs that evening wasn't in the forecast. It came suddenly, violently, as if the sky itself was trying to warn someone. At 11:47 p.m., while David was away on a business trip in New York, Claire was awakened by a knock at the door. Not a polite knock, not a neighbor borrowing sugar. This was a rhythmic, deliberate thump, thump, thump that seemed to vibrate through her chest. Claire checked the security camera on her phone. The porch was empty. She descended the stairs, her bare feet cold on the hardwood, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just the swaying branches of the old oak tree and the rain slicing through the porch light like silver blades. She opened the door. On the welcome mat lay a Polaroid photograph. In the picture, Claire stood in a dark alley behind a warehouse in Cicero. A place she had never been, she told herself. A place she didn't recognize. She was handing a thick envelope to a man whose face was blurred by motion. The timestamp on the photo's white border read, October 16, 2026, 2:34 a.m. Claire's hands trembled. Her perfect manicure suddenly seemed grotesque. She looked over her shoulder, up and down the darkened street where the Fishers' Lexus and the Yamamoto's Tesla sat undisturbed in their driveways. She whispered to the empty porch, "Who are you?" The oak tree creaked. The rain swallowed her words. Part 3. The Other Life. 3 years earlier, Claire Henderson had been Claire O'Brien, a forensic accountant for the FBI's Chicago field office. She had spent 6 years tracking the financial footprints of the Midwest's most dangerous criminal organization, the Marano family, a Sicilian-American syndicate that had controlled the flow of fentanyl through the Great Lakes region for 2 decades. Her work had been meticulous, invisible, devastating. She had traced $47 million in laundered money through shell companies in Lake Forest, Naperville, and yes, even Oak Brook. She had built a case so airtight it could have put away Vincent, the architect Marano, for life. But the night before the indictments were to be filed, Claire received a video on her government-issued phone. It showed her mother, Eleanor, asleep in her retirement home in Sarasota, Florida. The camera panned slowly to the pillow beside her mother's head, where a single red rose lay, the Marano family's calling card. The message was clear. We can reach anyone, anytime, anywhere. The next morning, Claire O'Brien disappeared. She was listed as a resignation in the FBI database, her case files mysteriously corrupted, her apartment in Lincoln Park emptied overnight. 6 months later, Claire Henderson appeared in Oak Brook with a new Social Security number, a new history, and a new husband who knew nothing of who she had been. But the Moranos hadn't forgotten her. They had simply been watching, waiting, and now they were calling in their debt. Part 4. The Warehouse. The address scrawled on the back of the Polaroid led Claire to an abandoned meatpacking plant in the back of the Yards neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. The building loomed against the night sky like a concrete dinosaur, its windows shattered, its loading docks rusted into jagged teeth. She told herself she wouldn't go. She told herself she would call the police, the FBI, anyone. But at 1 a.m., she found herself driving south on the Dan Ryan Expressway, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white moons in the dashboard light. The plant's interior smelled of old blood and newer chemicals. Her footsteps echoed through cavernous halls where sides of beef had once hung like macabre fruit. A single light bulb swung from a meat hook in the center of the main processing room, illuminating a figure seated in a metal folding chair. Vincent Morano was 63 years old, with the weathered hands of a man who had started in the stockyards and built an empire on the bones of his enemies. He smiled when Claire entered, and the smile was worse than any threat. "Claire O'Brien," he said, his voice like gravel in a velvet bag. "Or should I say, Claire Henderson, mother of 3, chair of the PTA, baker of excellent gluten-free muffins." He tossed a folder onto the concrete floor. It slid to her feet and opened, spilling photographs across the ground. David, leaving his office. Emma, at her soccer practice. Jack, riding his bike. Sophie, sleeping in her canopy bed. The pink nightlight casting fairy shadows on the wall. "Beautiful family," Morano said. "It would be a shame to see anything happen to them. A car accident on the Eisenhower, a gas leak at the school, a home invasion on Maplewood Drive, the kind where no one survives." Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want?" Morano stood, his chair scraping against the concrete like a scream. "The FBI has a new task force. They're building a case against my nephew, Anthony. He's reckless, stupid, a liability. I want you to do what you do best, Claire. I want you to find the holes in their investigation. I want you to make it disappear." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the cigars and the expensive cologne. "And if you refuse, or if you go to your old friends in the bureau, I want you to remember something. Remember that I found you in your perfect house in your perfect suburb. Remember that I was patient for 3 years. And remember that patience is the only thing more dangerous than rage." Part 5. The Double Life. Claire became 2 women. By day, she was the Claire Henderson that Oak Brook loved. She organized the fall festival at the community center. She helped Emma with her science project on the water cycle. She made Jack's favorite macaroni and cheese from scratch and braided Sophie's hair before bedtime. She kissed David when he returned from New York and told him she had missed him. And it wasn't entirely a lie. By night, she was Claire O'Brien again. She accessed the FBI's case management system through back doors she had installed years ago, back doors that should have been closed, but that she had built to be invisible. She read the files on Anthony Morano, tracked the agents assigned to his case, identified the witnesses and the evidence, and she sabotaged it all. A witness in Milwaukee suddenly received a threatening letter with photographs of his daughter's school. A wiretap authorization was delayed in paperwork until the warrant expired. A key piece of financial evidence was accidentally marked as contaminated in the chain of custody. She told herself she was protecting her family. She told herself she had no choice. She told herself that when the Muranos were satisfied, they would leave her alone, and she could return to being just one woman again. But the human soul is not a ledger that balances so easily. Every night, after she closed her laptop and deleted her browsing history, Claire would stand in her children's doorways and watch them sleep. She would memorize the rise and fall of their breathing, the softness of their faces, the innocence she was desperately trying to preserve. And every morning she would wake up with a new gray hair and a new hollow space behind her eyes. Part 6. The Crack in the Armor. It was Detective Marcus Webb of the Chicago Police Department who first noticed something wrong. Webb was a 40-year veteran, a black man who had grown up in Inglewood and risen through the ranks on stubbornness and an inability to look away from inconvenient truths. He had been assigned to investigate a series of overdoses in the Gold Coast. Rich kids from good families, the kind of deaths that made headlines and angry phone calls to the mayor's office. The trail had led him to Anthony Marano, and from Anthony to the edges of something larger. But every time Webb got close, the evidence evaporated. Witnesses recanted. Surveillance footage was corrupted. Case files were sealed by federal order. Webb didn't believe in coincidence. He believed in patterns, and the pattern here was of a chess master moving pieces from behind a curtain. He started watching the FBI task force. He started watching who accessed what files, when, and from where. And on a rainy Tuesday in November, he traced an unauthorized login to an IP address in Oak Brook, Illinois. The address belonged to a white colonial on Maplewood Drive. Webb sat in his unmarked Crown Victoria for 3 hours that night, watching the house through the rain. He saw a woman in yoga pants carrying groceries. He saw a man in a suit arrive home and kiss her at the door. He saw the lights go out in the upstairs bedrooms, one by one, like stars being extinguished. And then, at 12:30 a.m., he saw the blue glow of a computer screen in a downstairs window. Webb knew, in the way that old detectives know things, that he had found his ghost. Part 7. The Confrontation. Webb didn't go to the FBI. He didn't go to his captain. He went to Claire's front door, alone, on a Saturday morning when David had taken the children to the Brookfield Zoo. Claire opened the door with a smile that faltered when she saw his badge. "Detective Webb," she said, her voice steady but her eyes calculating exits. "Is there a problem in the neighborhood? Can we talk inside, Mrs. Henderson?" They sat in her kitchen at the marble island where she had rolled out cookie dough with Emma the night before. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny witnesses. Webb didn't waste time. "I know who you are, Claire O'Brien. I know what you're doing for the Muranos, and I know why." Claire's hand tightened around her coffee mug. For a moment, she was silent. Then she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think you know," she said. "You think this is a story about a woman who made a deal with the devil. But let me tell you something, detective. The devil doesn't make deals. He just waits. He waits until you're so tired of running, so tired of looking over your shoulder, that you stop running, and then he owns you." She set down her mug. 3 years ago, I had a choice. I could let my mother die, let my colleagues die, let myself die, and maybe, put Vincent Marano in prison for 10 years before his lawyers got him out. Or I could disappear, build a life, and hope that the past would stay buried. And now? Now I have a husband who thinks I'm a saint. I have children who think I'm invincible. And I have a man in a warehouse who can take it all away with a phone call. She looked at Webb, and her eyes were ancient. "What would you do, detective, if you were me?" Webb was quiet for a long time. Outside, a leaf blower started somewhere down the street, the sound of suburban normalcy. "I would find a third option. he said finally. Because the devil you described, he doesn't let go. He takes and takes until there's nothing left. And when you're empty, he takes your family too. He slid a card across the island. I'm building a RICO case. I have enough to indict Anthony, and I'm close to Vincent. But I need someone inside. Someone who knows the money, the accounts, the network. Claire stared at the card. You want me to go back undercover, in my own home, with my children sleeping upstairs. I want you to stop being two people and start being one again. The one who was brave enough to take on the Moranos in the first place. He stood, his chair scraping against the tile. You have my number. But understand this, Claire. The Moranos know you're helping them. They don't know you're helping me, and the moment they suspect, the moment they even wonder, your family is already dead. He walked to the door, then turned. There's no such thing as a perfect suburban mom, but there is such a thing as a real one. Figure out which one you want to be. Part 8, The Reckoning. Claire didn't sleep for 3 days. She walked through her life like a woman in a dream, performing the rituals of motherhood while her mind raced through corridors of possibility and terror. She watched David at dinner, laughing at Jack's knock-knock jokes, and wondered if this was the last time she would see him happy. She braided Sophie's hair and memorized the exact color of her eyes, a hazel that shifted between green and gold in the light. On the 4th night, she made her choice. She contacted Webb with a message so cryptic it would have made her old FBI handlers proud. The muffins are ready. Pick up at the usual place. They met in the parking lot of a 24-hour Walmart in Hammond, Indiana, far enough from Oak Brook to be invisible. Claire handed over 3 years of secrets. Account numbers, shell company structures, names of corrupt officials on the Morano payroll, and, the crown jewel, recordings of her conversations with Vincent, made on a device hidden in her yoga mat. I want immunity, she said, for everything. And I want witness protection for my family, not just new names, new lives. Somewhere the Moranos can't reach. Webb took the drive, his hands careful, his eyes meeting hers. This is enough to bring them down. But Claire, you know what happens next. They'll come for you. They'll come before we can move. I know, she said, and she did. She drove home through the Indiana toll road, the Chicago skyline rising before her like a constellation of false stars. She thought about the life she had built, the woman she had pretended to be, the cookies baked and the committees chaired and the smiles exchanged over white picket fences. She had been a ghost, haunting her own life. Now she was choosing to be alive again, even if the cost was everything. Part 9. The storm returns. Vincent Morano came for her on a Sunday. The children were at a birthday party in Hinsdale. David was on the golf course in Oak Park. Claire was alone in the house, packing the last of the evidence into a waterproof bag when the security system went dark. The power cut out first. Then the backup generator failed. Then the silence came. A silence so complete it was its own sound. The silence of a held breath. She knew they were in the house before she heard the footsteps. She could feel them in the walls, in the floorboards, in the air itself. The Moranos didn't send enforcers. They sent professionals. Men who had learned their trade in the wars of Chicago's streets, who could enter a home and leave it empty without disturbing a single photograph on the mantel. Claire moved through the darkened hallway toward the back stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had a gun, an old Glock 19, hidden in a false book in the study, but she knew that drawing it would be a death sentence. Her only hope was to reach the panic room David had installed 2 years ago, a room she had laughed at, calling it paranoid. She was 3 feet from the door when the lights came back on. Vincent Morano stood in her living room, surrounded by men in dark suits that cost more than her Volvo. He was holding a photograph. Sophie, at her kindergarten graduation, her face painted with a butterfly. "Beautiful girl," he said, not looking at Claire. "She has your eyes. Did you know that?" Claire stopped. Her hand was inches from the panic room keypad. "You made a mistake, Claire," Morano continued, his voice conversational, almost kind. "You thought you could play both sides. You thought you were smart enough, careful enough, brave enough. But do you know what I've learned in 63 years of life?" He turned to her and his eyes were empty. "Everyone breaks," he said. "The only question is what breaks first. The body, the mind, or the will?" He gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward with a silenced pistol. "I'm going to give you a choice, Claire, the same choice I gave you 3 years ago. Your family or your principles. But this time, the price is higher. This time, you don't get to disappear. You get to stay right here in your perfect house, and you get to work for me until I decide you're no longer useful. And when that day comes, when you finally break completely, I'll let you watch what happens to your children before I let you die." He smiled. "Choose." Claire looked at the gun. She looked at the photograph of Sophie. She looked at the life she had built, the lies she had told, the woman she had become. And then she heard the sound. Sirens. Distant at first, then closer, then everywhere, surrounding the house like a net of sound. Morano's men tensed. Morano himself frowned, a crack in his composure. "That," Claire said, her voice steady for the first time in years, "is the sound of the third option." The doors burst open. FBI tactical teams swarmed through every entrance, their weapons raised, their voices shouting commands that filled the house like thunder. Detective Webb entered behind them, his badge held high, his eyes finding Claire's across the chaos. Morano reached for his own weapon, but he was too slow, too old, too surprised by a world that had finally stopped obeying his rules. An agent tackled him to the ground, and the photograph of Sophie fluttered from his hand, landing at Claire's feet. She picked it up. She smoothed the creases. She held it to her chest, and she finally let herself cry. Part 10, The Aftermath. The trials took 18 months. Vincent Morano was convicted on 347 counts of racketeering, murder, drug trafficking, and witness tampering. He died in federal prison 3 years later, stabbed by a member of a rival gang, a death as violent and anonymous as the ones he had ordered for others. Anthony Morano turned state's evidence and received a reduced sentence, spending the next decade in a minimum security facility in Wisconsin, where he eventually found Jesus and wrote a memoir that no one read. Even under cross-examination by defense attorneys who tried to paint her as a criminal, a traitor, a woman who had betrayed her own family, she was all of those things she knew, and none of them. The Witness Protection Program relocated the Hendersons to a small town in the Pacific Northwest, where the rain was different from Chicago's rain, softer, more persistent, as if the sky was trying to wash something clean. David learned the truth in stages, his anger giving way to grief, grief to understanding, understanding to a love that was more complicated and more real than the one they had built on lies. The children adapted, as children do. Emma became a teenager who wrote poetry about identity and masks. Jack discovered a talent for basketball that had nothing to do with his parents' past. Sophie, too young to remember Oak Brook, grew up knowing only that her mother was the strongest person she had ever met. And Claire became one woman again. She worked as a bookkeeper for a local nonprofit, helping refugees navigate the American financial system. She volunteered at a domestic violence shelter, where she told her story to women who needed to know that survival was possible, that the double life could end, that the ghost could become human again. Some nights, she still woke up at 11:47 p.m., her heart racing, expecting a knock at the door. But the knock never came, and slowly, year by year, the space between the fear and the peace grew wider. On the 10th anniversary of Vincent Morano's arrest, Claire stood on the deck of her small house and watched the sun set over the Olympic Mountains. The light was gold and rose, painting the sky in colors that had no name. Behind her, she could hear David cooking dinner, the children arguing about whose turn it was to set the table, the ordinary music of a life that was finally, truly real. She thought about the woman she had been, the FBI agent, the suburban mom, the ghost, the traitor, the survivor. She thought about the choices that had led her here, the prices paid, the debts settled, and she whispered to the mountain wind, "I'm still here." The wind took her words and carried them away, and the sun disappeared behind the peaks, and the stars came out one by one, indifferent and eternal. Claire went inside to join her family. Closing note. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you found yourself caught in the suspense, haunted by the choices, or moved by the journey from darkness back to light, then you found your home on this channel. We believe that the best stories aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors. They show us who we are, who we might become, and the strength we never knew we had. Every week we bring you tales rooted in American places and American hearts, stories that will make you check your locks, hold your loved ones closer, and remember that even in the deepest shadows, there's always a path back to the light. This is your English Story channel. If this story stayed with you, if the characters felt real and the suspense kept you listening, then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Be part of a community that values the power of a well-told tale, the thrill of a perfectly crafted twist, and the meaning that lingers long after the final word. Good luck out there. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, everyone has a story. The question is whether you're brave enough to live yours. We'll see you on the next story. Subscribe and don't miss it.